Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 47-minute webinar. Today, we are talking about faith-based fundraising. This is a kind of I don't know if it's a fine niche because there was a lot of response to this when we thought it was going to be a fine niche webinar, and we're going to jump into it. But there's some really unique opportunities, and we work with a lot of faith-based organizations, so we're glad that you are here. Just to give a quick overview of where we're going this morning. We're going to look at some opportunities and obstacles that come with faith-based fundraising, faith-based organizations. We always have a time of Q&R, question and response. So as you're thinking of questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, write them down. And if it's urgent and relevant enough, take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask. We don't mind interruptions. We want this to be relevant. Also, be thinking of your top takeaway. We always love to get that type of feedback, and we want it to be practical. So if there's a way that you can actually apply at least one thing that we've talked about, that's encouraging to us, and it'll also encourage someone else as well.
And Aaron, let me just mention this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working from a remote office for the last couple of weeks due to a fire. And anyhow, my internet bandwidth is not what I'm used to. And so I may kind of fade in and out, celebrate the moments when I'm gone.
Okay, that's a good point for the overview, because we've been on some Zooms where you've frozen up on me this week, so everyone else can know that you're not in the main office. And we'll try to give you some grace for technology difficulties. And I think we can all relate to that, the technical difficulties. We'll also talk about some things coming up. We always have more events, opportunities, engagements. So those we'll do those kind of announcements at the end. But with no more delaying, let's go ahead and get started. Kent, let's talk about which faith, puppy puzzle, and whose work.
Yeah. So, the term faith-based fundraising could mean a lot of different things. And we know there are a lot of different faiths. There may be numerous faiths represented. The perspective that we're bringing really is the Christian faith. And so we're going to voice everything kind of in the context of the Christian faith. And if that's not directly applicable for you, make application, because I think you'll find a lot of things that are really transferable. And a lot of times people ask me this question: how's fundraising in a faith-based community or by a person of faith? How is that different from other fundraising? And for me, it's easiest to think of it this way in terms of a puppy puzzle. Do we have anybody on the call who likes to put together puzzles? Just by show of hands. Okay, hands down. Is there anybody who just doesn't like people who do puzzles? Let me see those hands. Well, I might have my hand up for both cases, but so think about a child's puzzle, and it has this cute puppy dog, and at the very center of the puzzle is that little wet nose. Has anybody seen that picture of that puzzle? So in a lot of ways, I like to think about most of the fundraising that we do where it's not faith-based is like a puzzle of a puppy, but with that one piece in the middle missing. For me, faith-based fundraising has all the pieces. And so what do I mean by that? And really, it kind of goes to the idea of whose work, but there's this whole idea of generosity and philanthropy. From the Christian faith standpoint, we say that God created it all, God owns it all, and that we are stewards, and that we either get to give a report or we have to give a report. And so that perspective kind of leads into the whole thing of whose work is it. And one of the things that we found beneficial is to from a biblical standpoint, realize that there's some work that God has reserved for himself. That's divine work. And what I find is if I try to do God's work, I mess things up terribly because you all already know I'm not God. And we should all celebrate that fact. Um, but on the other hand, there's work that God could do, but He doesn't. He chooses His people to do it, and so one of the things that's problematic in a lot of our organizations, again, especially faith-based, is where we say, "Well, I'm just going to my part is just to pray and ask God to do everything," and I believe we should call on God for God work, but then that to take action on the things that are ours to do. And there's a part of the raising of funds that is our work. And somebody said we should work like it all depends on us and pray like it all depends on God. So anyhow, those are just some kind of foundational thoughts that I wanted to share as we get started, just to kind of give an idea of the perspective that I come from. Aaron, what would you add?
What would I add on this side? No, I think you covered it pretty well. There are times, I'll just say from the consulting standpoint, there are times that we do work with what I might call a somewhat neutral organization. They're not of any faith. Um, and actually, speaking of the puppy puzzle, you've done some work with the SPCA. Um, and so a lot of times we get the question, do you only work with Christian organizations? No, but we certainly don't we we don't work with organizations whose missions don't align with our values if they're somewhat contradictory or counterproductive to our personal values. But yeah, there's a whole array of organizations out there, and we certainly do tend to align a little bit more with the Christian faith, but there may be people on the call who aren't of the Christian faith, and these principles should apply as well. So I'll say enough about that. As we were preparing for this webinar, I found that a lot of the opportunities had a counterpart that were obstacles, and so we're going to address these. And Ken already started kind of going this, but man, a great opportunity that faith-based organizations have is the idea of common ground. That there are many, many donors and funders out there, even foundations who relate to or are blatantly labeled and identify as Christian donors, Christian organizations, Christian foundations. And I think that's such an easy opportunity to find common ground with people because most dedicated Christians will actually say the the number one identifying mark of their lives. If you're asking who are you, they're gonna relay that back to their faith, even above family, which family's always up there, but who are you? Man, I'm a child of God. I'm a Christian. I'm a Christ follower. They relate that back to faith, and that's such a great opportunity to find common ground if you're a faith-based organization. A lot of our missions in our faith-based organizations are revolved around the gospel or some mission or value that we find in the scriptures. And again, it's going to be a really easy way to connect with people because you start talking about your mission, your faith, and what drives you, what the values are, and it's relate to your faith, and like, oh, I'm the same faith, and it's just instant rapport, instant common ground. There's a fellowship of believers, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a part of the Christian faith, and you don't want to overlook that. You don't want to neglect that. Um, Even the idea of salvation, there's a lot of times we can go back and find salvation at the root of why we do what we do. Feeding the hungry. I've talked to organizations who that's their mission. They're feeding the hungry, and part of their motive is people seem to be more open to the gospel once their bellies are fed. And so that paves the way for this idea of salvation or spreading the gospel. So that common ground is a great opportunity. And Kent and I, we're just kind of tag team in this thing. Kent, anything you want to talk about common ground?
I think you've covered all the common ground here.
Covered all the common ground. Well, so then the obstacle is distinct differences. And this is uh I'll just throw it out there, and this may ruffle some feathers, it may not, but if it ruffles your feathers, then this is a good point that you really need to consider. But if and everyone on the call is going to relate to this, but we all find that the mission of our organization is probably the most important mission in the world. But if there's 1,000 different organizations and 1,000 different missions, how can they all be number one? And the reality is, our different passions, our different giftings, the different missions, they can be our number one, but does it mean they are the number one? And it's very easy for our personal passion to say, this is what God wants number one in the entire world. And so again, I use the example of feeding the hungry. Some people are just that's the number one thing we should do. Some people are out there trying to rescue victims of sex trafficking. Some people are out there. My background is youth ministry. I'm like, man, if we can reach the teenagers, we'll change the world. And I'm very passionate about that. Some people are, really passionate about Bible distribution. We got to translate the Bible into all these different languages, or we got to get the Bible, the message of the gospel to these communities that don't even have a written language. And we work with one of those organizations, and we're passionate about what they do, but it's easy for us to try to, and naturally so, say, okay, what I'm doing is the most important thing, and that's going to take precedent over everything else. And it's easy for us to project that onto others, even onto our donors. And that can be an obstacle. We need to step back and consider that not everyone's going to have that same passion point as we do, and be considerate of that. We need to be secure knowing that donors may contribute to a couple different organizations with a couple different missions. Foundations do the same. And even though our personal passion is so great that we're laser focused on this one mission, not everyone is in that same boat, and being content with that and try not to project our passion on everyone else. Of course, share your passion, but you don't want to force it. So that's kind of the maybe the paradox of finding the common ground is there's a whole bunch of other missions out there. And one of the things I love about being in the consultant world is getting to see those and getting to experience them and work side by side with the teams that are pushing the mission forward, because there's some amazing work out there. I mean, I know if we took everyone on the call and got, allowed them to share what your mission is accomplishing, 47 minutes isn't enough time, and everyone would want to hear it. It's so great,
Yeah.
but they don't all have to be number one for everybody. So I think that's the counterpoint to the common ground, is just knowing that there's some distinct differences and being okay with that. Let your faith be the unifying factor, but don't let it be a dividing factor.
And Aaron, I think one of the things I would say, and frankly, this is the same approach we take whether it's a faith-based organization or not, and that is let the fundraising rest on the merits of the organization rather than trying to raise funds on the demerits of something else, right? We don't
Right.
ever ask somebody to not give so they can give to us, right? If the mission is worthy and if it aligns with the way you're shaped, then please be generous. If not, I'd love to introduce you to somebody that's more in line with whatever your personal
Mhm.
preferences are.
Yeah. And we bring this up because we don't want people to operate out of a fear-based perspective of fundraising. And the fear-based perspective is, well, if they're giving to someone else, they won't give to me. Or if they're giving to another mission, they won't give to our mission. And the reality is, people can have a variety of passions and want to support a variety of missions, and that's okay. Sometimes, well, we even define success as helping donors make well-informed decisions. And if we think they're only going to give to one organization, we're operating out of a fear-based or scarcity mentality, and we don't want that.
Good point.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Here's another great opportunity: biblical generosity. There, the idea of generosity is ingrained in the scriptures. If you're not raised in the Christian faith, or maybe you come to the faith later in life, the idea of giving away money is not intuitive. I like to use the example of Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest men that I don't know. And uh, and it took him a long time to get to the place where he was generous with his money, because from a business standpoint, if we're focused on profits, I want to make a profit, increase profits for my shareholders. Why would I give money away? Mathematically, it doesn't add up. And I think it was eventually through his relationship with Bill Gates where he finally started to be generous and give some money away. But that's from a worldly perspective. From a biblical perspective, generosity is built in to our value system. We serve a generous God. He he actually commands generosity. We see it as tithes and offerings in the Old Testament. We see it as helping out the foreigners and the exiles in the Old Testament. We see it taken to a whole new level in the New Testament, where we view ourselves as a living sacrifice to God. So this idea of generosity, when you're a faith-based organization and your funding community is going to be aligned with that same faith, it's a fantastic opportunity because we don't have to teach the principle of generosity. It's already ingrained into our faith, into the value set that God sets before us. And what a wonderful opportunity. Churches, I think, benefit from this the most because the tithe and offering, I mean, that's been a practice that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. But even in the nonprofit sector, if you're a ministry or just a faith-based organization, you you thrive and you're funded by other people's generosity. And when there's that faith in there, it just provides a great opportunity. It's built in, but there does come an obstacle. Can't you say anything about generosity before we jump into the obstacle?
Well, I guess when I think about generosity, I go back to the origin. So the scripture tells us that that we were created in the image of God. And if there's anything we know about God, it's that God is generous. God is a giver. And so when we give and when we invite others to give, we're inspiring them to express the purpose for which they're created, their God likeness. So anyhow, I think when we do that as fundraisers, that's a position of boldness, and it's not something we should be timid about. Now, don't be demanding, right? But that thing, when people tell me, I don't want to ask for money, or sometimes I've had pastors, frankly, brag, I've never preached a message on giving. I think it's unfortunate because what that's doing is in a way kind of diminishing one of the core purposes of why we were created. That is that we could be a reflection of God.
Yeah. And that actually leads us into the obstacle here, or at least could be the obstacle, this idea of guilt and obligation, the spiritual guilt trip. We want to avoid that at all costs. That might even be spiritual manipulation. We don't want to spiritually manipulate people or guilt trip
Mm.
people into giving, because that kind of takes away the heart of generosity. Uh, and then there can also be some obligation that's taken advantage of. And again, from from being from a church background history, and now working predominantly with nonprofit organizations, the obligation piece can look it, what I've observed, and so I don't want to put anyone on the spot here. I'm not speaking about. I haven't worked at anyone's church who's on the call, but it's easy for churches to skip really great practices like donor stewardship, saying thank you to the donors because well they're just being obedient. They're in and they don't need a thank you. They should be obedient regardless. And it's like, well, it's still okay to say thank you. And if you're in the nonprofit organization and not in the church, you might be wondering, what is Aaron talking about? Why would you not thank your donors? Why would you not steward your donors? But sometimes that can happen. Even how we do that can, it's like, let's celebrate when people are generous and let's say thank you, even if it's a biblical command, and we can kind of see that in our faith. We should It's still a choice that someone has to make, and especially if they're giving on a sacrificial level, that should be encouraged and praised. And we don't need to put a big spotlight and overdo it, but how appropriate is a thank you? We couldn't accomplish our mission without your generosity, and that goes a long ways. As far as as far as the guilt trip, this can look a lot of different ways. Kent, you want to share how that can look in the boardroom sometimes, where it's
Yeah.
maybe not the best approach to leadership, but it's easy to over spiritualize.
Yeah. So actually, this isn't a direct fundraising application, but I think it's an example of what I call over spiritualization. And sometimes we have a tendency to make something spiritual that may not even be spiritual. Okay. And with unintended consequences. So I was in a board meeting one time and there was some impassioned plea, emotion in front of us. And here's what the board chair said: all in favor say, praise the Lord. Now, here's my question: when emotion is put that way, how can you respond? And it stacks everything behind there's only one right answer, right? And of course, my question, I wasn't in a position to ask this, but if you're not in favor, what are you supposed to say? Tony, I see you laughing. I'm not even going to ask what you're thinking, but it's probably same thing I was thinking, right? So, anyhow, to me, that's an example of over spiritualization. Again, I don't think that person intended to polarize, but it did. I mean, it gives you no option to think any way other than one way. And Aaron, like you were saying earlier, there's common ground and there are distinct differences. And I think we need to be thoughtful in how a lot of times, here's something I hear in fundraisers. Well, just pray about it. And I think you don't want somebody to just pray about it. I mean, yeah, pray about it. But if they just pray about it, that's not making a gift.
Mhm.
And well, only give if the Lord prompts you. I mean, I don't even know what that means. I know a lot of ways that it's applied and misapplied. So again, I just think as fundraisers and as faith-based organizations, we should never lead with presumption, guilt, or obligation. That's not modeling the best of what the faith has to offer.
Right. So again, great opportunity and obstacle. Man, biblical generosity is built in to our faith, but let's not try to take advantage of that or manipulate that. Let's leave room for celebrating that generosity and not becoming little spiritually manipulative, whether intentional or not. Sometimes it happens that way and it's not even intentional, but we got to be aware of the behavior. All right, the next one. This is kind of our last out of the three screens here. There's great opportunities for committees and teams when it comes to faith-based organizations. And I'm actually gonna throw up the obstacle, and we were kind of wrestling with this. Is it an obstacle? But there's I think two different approaches that we want to take when we consider a governing board and then committees and teams. And this may be the most controversial out of all of our points this morning, but when you have people involved in your organization and you're a faith-based organization, you're going to get people from a variety of walks of life, but there's probably going to be that common thread of similar faith. And you're also going to get great leaders that are in the faith. And so the question is, what if people want to get involved more so than just being a donor, more than just giving? So if we're of course we're looking at fundraising, but what if we step back and look even bigger? People may want to serve on a committee or a team or a board. And here's a huge temptation for and again, I'll kind of pick on the Christian group because that's where my faith lies. But the Christian nonprofit, it's easy for the Christian nonprofit to look at their board and say, we only want pastors to make up our board. In fact, I know an organization that was one of their criteria. You have to be, it may even be an ordained minister to serve on their board. We've worked with other organizations. They're a missions group, and so they have missionaries making up their entire board. And why that can be an obstacle is that is not a very diverse group of people. So even though there's that common ground, that common thread, by nature of that, we're narrowing our diversity down to missionaries or pastors. Sometimes even other nonprofit leaders will serve on other nonprofit boards. A CEO of one organization is serving as a board member of the other. And the title of our webinar is Faith-Based Fundraising. We do a great job at empowering board members to engage in the fundraising process. And there's certainly room for that. But there becomes a huge conflict of interest when uh, the, when there's nonprofit leaders or pastors or missionaries working in the fundraising space for multiple organizations, and uh, it's not the best scenario across the board. I'll let Kent explain it with a little more maybe gentleness or clarity. But when it comes down to it, you're kind of putting your board in a bad spot. And some of the response I've received is, man, Aaron, we want we want our board to be above reproach. We want it to be, these people of integrity, and so pastors are that, and that that sends a message, that sends a couple of messages that we probably don't want to send. That's sending the message that pastors have higher integrity than other Christian men and women that aren't employed by a church. It's like, of course, we wouldn't say that, but that's the message that's being sent. And then also, when it comes to community engagement, there's just going to be a self-imposed conflict there of, well, if I run across this donor, am I representing maybe the church that I work at or this organization that I'm volunteering at? And we're putting people in a tough spot, kind of in between a rock and a hard place. And we don't want to set people up for failure. We want to set people up for success. So there's the tension that lies. Now, before we get into the great opportunity of committees and teams, Kent, do you want to speak into some of that tension point that we're addressing before we get into the solutions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And one of the things that sometimes, I mean, some people have said, um, we can't have people of influence or affluence on our board because we want people who are Christians. Like, well, how did that get mutually exclusive? Um, so the point, whether it's the governing board or the committees and teams, I think it's important for us to first of all say what's needed. What are the qualities that are needed? What are the activities that are needed? And then recruit for the needs rather than just starting with a tag. And, I mean, in my local community, Well, we ought to recruit so and so from Oklahoma Wesleyan University. They're really good at fundraising. We ought to put them on our board. Yeah, they're good at fundraising for Oklahoma Wesleyan University. No discredits, but they're probably not going to be a great fundraiser for a different mission when they're paid to raise funds someplace else. So again, to me, the key thing on this, the governing boards and committees and teams, um, what um, what qualities are needed, where can they bring the most impact, and then recruit for that rather than just kind of the stereotype thing. And as I look around the room, I see so many friends and colleagues, Kathy, grant writing, John Martin. When I think about the various roles you've had at the university, at the foundation, I mean, I can't even keep up with all the impact you're making, but there are many different ways that as people of faith and in organizations of faith make an impact in the volunteer role, as board members and others, as well as in the giving and the asking for gifts.
Yes. And so to be solution oriented, because we're not just here to dog on how some of the structures have been set up with some organizations, but there's space for committees and teams. If you want to have a group of people who have high integrity, they have good reputation in the community, and you want them to hold the organization accountable, that could be a committee. Just like we have a finance committee, people who oversee the books, and we want them to specialize in maybe finances, accounting. We want them to have a knack for that. It's okay to do that with, maybe you have like the integrity committee. Let's make sure that our C-suite and our CEO, that they're not causing any scandals out there, getting us on the front page of the newspaper for the wrong reason. So we're going to have healthy accountability. So they're the integrity committee. Maybe we need people who are really savvy to ministry. So they're doing ministry day in, day out. So naturally they might be the pastors and the missionaries, and they're a ministry committee or a ministry team. If you can only have pastors on your board, you're probably not going to have a lawyer on your board because not many pastors are lawyers. And yeah, and if they are, they're probably not one according to the definition that you have set for what you need on your board. Same thing with the accountant or the some you might want some people that are simply high profile in the community, and that's an okay to desire to have and a goal to strive for your organization. So utilize committees and teams in conjunction with the governing board. Again, we think the best structures, in the words in there, governing board, not even an operational board. But if you need some people in the operations, make a committee and team for that. But you want your board to govern, and we see that as a best practice. And so there's certainly solution, and there's space, and there's creativity. And sometimes if this is easier done on the front end than the back end. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my goodness, you're describing us and I don't even know it, like, yeah, uh, are you talking about me? Um, we might be, inadvertently, but if you need some work to get there, we can certainly help with that. And it's very feasible to accomplish that. So we're glad to help out there, but we want to get the organization's leadership structure set up to where it's the accomplishing the mission is going to happen with the least amount of resistance. So we think this is one way to do that, and it's kind of unique to the faith-based community. No one else really operates quite that way, so we're bringing it up. Okay, before we move into a uh, a time of Q&R, I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick. If there's any part of this, maybe you would like the slide deck, you want to share this with someone. I'm going to take down my chat screen too so I can get to my thing here. I'm going to launch this up here. If you want the slide deck or even the YouTube recording of this later, and in that, joining our communication list. So we'll send you more stuff. But if you aren't on our communication list and you want to stay up to date with this, go ahead and drop your email in the box, and I'll make sure to add you. A lot of you already are getting our stuff, but if you aren't and you want to join the communication list, not only will I send you the YouTube link and the slide deck for today, so you can reference it later, maybe pass on to some other board members for a point of reference, but um, we'll send you some more stuff when it comes to fundraising and governance and all of that as well. As people are doing that, we will move into a time of Q&R, question and response. So if you have any, there's already been a few comments in the chat box, and we call it Q&R, not Q&A, because we don't always have the answer, but we can at least get a response and find the answer. And I
Hey,
loved, yeah,
well, I wanted to make one comment to build, Aaron, on what you said earlier about you were
okay.
commenting on integrity. And when it comes to integrity, ethics, and transparency, please, in the faith, we should not be the exceptions to the rule. We should be the bearers of the standards.
Mm,
And if you haven't, for example, adopted the Donor Bill of Rights, do that. Um, Model Donor Bill of Rights, model ethical behavior, integrity in leadership, and transparency in what we do. I think a lot of times we complain because in the faith we say, people are picking on us. Well, I think usually we're getting picked on because we're given such bad examples that they're easy to pick on, and that shouldn't be synonymous with the faith community. So anyhow, we always want to be holding those standards high, and I know many of you on the call, I know, and I know you do that. And I'm thankful for that. We need to stand together and support each other as we do
all right. You're preaching it.
that. Stop.
Okay. Let's look at some of the chats and see what's going on. Joseph, thank you for quoting St. Augustine and not attributing that quote to Kent Stroman, because he didn't. You didn't come up with that, did you? Pray as though everything depended on God. Work as though everything depended on you. I think they're. Oh, he's holding it up right there.
Way to
Yeah.
go, Joseph.
Um, let's see. Someone on an iPhone said, I think when people get so excited, they totally might forget to say thank you. Make sure to send a thank you note. That is so great. The donor will remember you and your organization. Yeah, man, say thank you. Thank yous go so far, and the more we can personalize it, the better. Now, this is a great point, and Ken, I'd love for you to speak to this, because I know you've dealt with this. Many churches keep the giving records of members confidential, and many pastors don't know who gives or how much they give. This creates difficulty in thinking individually. It doesn't make expressing gratitude impossible, but it's not as simple as in the nonprofit world. Kent, do you first want to explain why those things are confidential? Because that's important for our non-church staff audience to know, and then maybe how to go about that if in that scenario.
Yeah. So Robert, first of all, thanks for the observation and the question. Um, if it was easy, we'd all be doing it already, right? But I think the relevant issues are the same regardless of the community. I will tell you the what I'm going to call the hyper confidentiality. Oh, the pastor doesn't know. I think the reason that exists is because of an abuse someplace along the way. And so we've made the kind of the punishment, we've applied the punishment to everybody for the kind of the abuse of a few. And we need to be thoughtful about what kinds of information are shared and where. I think detriment when the leader of an organization isn't aware of changes in generosity, because usually that is reflective of something that's bigger than money. And so actually, um, one of the things I jotted down is don't be proud about being ignorant, needy, or passive. And are there ways that we can be informed and confident and proactive and not be abusive? Of course, right? And so we want to be balanced in that. So again, as relates to confidentiality, sometimes we need to separate numbers from names. Okay, if I was a church treasurer, which I am not, but if I was, or if I was the keeper of the giving records, I would periodically want to put together a list for on the ministry team. We need to take a special effort and reach out, touch base to see how things are going with these people in the congregation. If somebody just started giving, I'd love to know why that happened. If somebody used to give regularly and they don't now, I wonder what changed. And so rather than being presumptuous or judgmental, somebody made a note, something sounds judgmental. I think we should be appropriately curious and then delicately act on that.
Yeah, it's good. Joseph, he wrote, I think the key issue when having someone on a board or committee is having someone who understands how the faith based organization is grounded. And he gives this example: a banker may have mission buy in, but may try to impose bank style transactional relationships instead of true relationships built on trust and mission. And I, Joseph, I would say those are really good. Those are some good dynamics to hash out in the boardroom, because you want that banker bringing some of the bank culture into the organization. But if it's counter mission or counterproductive to the mission, then let's hash it out and understand why. But those some of that diversity is really healthy. So it's like, okay, what can we take from your experience and apply it to our mission? And then what can we take from this other experience, apply it to the mission, and we'll have a well-rounded approach to viewing it all. Because if the banker's not in there, there's no bank perspective, and that might not be a bad perspective to have. So we want that guy in there. So but yeah, we can you know every a lot of times the lawyers see everything through that legal lens, the bankers see it through the banker lens, the accountant sees everything through the tax liability lens. And we don't want to be killing flies with hammers when the fly swatter will do. So the diversity is very, very important and valuable in there.
Wow, and Aaron, we've got a bunch of questions rushing in that I know really great topics need response. Also realize where we are in our 47 minutes, and I wonder if we might be able to follow up with some of those individually, maybe by email afterwards. But maybe go ahead and let's just hear what are some top takeaways. If you've got something that really stood out to you today, please just drop a quick note in the chat box, and we'll be reviewing these, kind of recapping them, and following up with some specific responses.
Yep, top takeaway. And yeah, I saw a couple questions that Tony, yours specifically, I'll follow up with that individually, because I'd love to talk about some of those dynamics. Should faith-based organizations receive money from foundations that aren't faith-based? Secular dollars. What a great conversation. I have some thoughts on that. So drop your top takeaway in while you're doing that. Let me tell you what's coming up. We have an Asking Academy Express coming up at the beginning of April. That's a 2 half days virtual Asking Academy, great for individuals. It's a condensed version of the Asking Academy Classic, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. That's coming up in the summit is in June. It'll actually start in May. This is teams of 4 to 6. It's probably the nation's most comprehensive fundraising, equipping, and training for nonprofit organizations. So this gets the entire team, both staff and volunteers and board members, all on the same page and equipped to do major and mega gift fundraising. Someone asked about fundraising approach in the chat too. The Asking Academy is our answer. And it works. If it doesn't work, we refund the fee, but we've never had to do that because it works. So if your organization could use a little bump in the fundraising world, talk to me about Asking Academy. In fact, you can even type Asking Academy in the chat and I'll follow up with you on that. What else we got going up? Oh yeah, askingacademy.com. We'll skip that. Kent is speaking at the AFP in Oklahoma on leveraging major gifts. That's March 7th. So just a couple, is that this week?
Day after tomorrow, I better
That's the
get
day
with
after
it.
tomorrow. That's coming up real fast. Okay. So if you're around, can people be guests at that without having to be members of the AFP?
Yes, they can. There's only a small penalty for doing it.
Okay. So yeah,
So
so there's a little fee to, a kind of ticket price if you want to be involved with that. And if you're not in the Eastern Oklahoma area, and you would like to bring Kent or Stroman and Associates to be a keynote speaker, do some consulting, we travel and can do that, but you kind of have to ask for it. So we don't twist arms and self-impose our services on others. So don't be shy in asking if we can serve you in any way. Also, oh, I'm excited for this one. Next month's 47-minute webinar. I made up a new word, audience, and I don't know how to say it though.
you can't even
Audience
say it, Aaron.
centric, audience centric, being centric to our audience presentations. And the big idea is valuing what your audience hears over what you say. Valuing what your audience hears over what you say, and those can be two different things. So if
Yeah.
you are in the keynote speaking, if you're up there giving presentations, we're gonna give you 47-minute webinar on how to do that with excellence. So we hope that you join there. And if anyone's going to Florida for the Outcomes Conference, Christian Leadership, I'll be doing a volunteer leadership training breakout there. And Kent and I both are going to do a breakout on supercharging your major gifts. So that's
And
that's
so,
in April.
Aaron, we're a minute past, but I
Oh,
just want to say, as it relates to faith-based fundraising, that's what the Outcomes Conference is all about. This is the Christian Leadership Alliance, and if you're not already planning to go, make plans if you can. If you can't go, maybe there's somebody that you know that could or should. Great content, good connections and relationships there. So,
Yeah, great point. If you're a Christian leader, definitely check out CLA, Christian Leadership Alliance, and this is their annual conference. We'd love to see you there. And with that, I'm sorry for going overtime. It was great content, good questions, good interaction. So this has been a fun one. But
don't
we
let it
want to
happen
say,
again.
yeah, want to say thank you. Blessings to you all. And we look forward to seeing you at the next 47-minute webinar.